evening. This is the big story. My name is Michelle Ngele Odhiambo. Now tonight, the push and pull for and against a referendum is fast mutating into a question of when rather than if. Today, a caucus of former parliamentarians led by immediate former chair of the Budget Committee, Mutava Musyimi, fanned the referendum narrative, saying this will help address governance and electoral injustices. Now, this comes in the wake of the Building Bridges initiative that is expected to conclude its mandate early next year and table a report with, among others, a recommendation for a referendum. Now, at the same time, leaders allied to Deputy President William Ruto and some sections of stakeholders feel a referendum is not a priority at this time. But as Mutava Musyimi opines, the current economic struggle was foreseen in 2014 and the time to fix it is now. Well, is it the time the country woke up from the 2010 constitution euphoria? Well, here are the questions that the much talked about referendum may seek to answer, as outlined by former Mbeere South Member of Parliament Mutava Musyimi.
There is a public question, and that is what we are trying to convey to the country through the media, that there is a question around the structure of government. There is a national question around the size of government, and there is a national question around the performance of government. And that question is everywhere. And that is why we undertook this process, because we felt we are interested parties. You don't shave your own back, that's what we say. Get an independent institution to define the issues.
Well, on the short night, I shall be speaking to Nandi Senator Samson Cherargei, former Nyeri Senator Mutahi Kagwe, who is joining us live from Nyeri Town, as well as former Mwingi Central Member of Parliament Joe Mutambu. But before I speak to them, let's bring in our lead reporter, Sophia Nuna, who's got more insights on this referendum debate. Sophia, good evening to you. The calls for referendum have seen proposals not only for the reduction of elected representatives in the country, but also a proposal on perhaps a different system of government, a parliamentary system as opposed to a presidential system of governance. What would that mean for Wanjiku?
Good evening, Michelle. Indeed, the debate around changes to the 2010 Constitution continues to range. The Constitution is 8 years old, and we had the likes of James Sorengo, who's the leader of minority in the Senate, just the other day categorically speak of a need to have a parliamentary system of governance. So the difference, what we have now is a presidential system of government. President Uhuru Kenyatta was voted into office by Kenyans directly, and he's the head of state as well as head of government. So a very powerful position. He gets to appoint the cabinet secretaries that run the everyday day activities in the various ministries in the country. So a presidential system of governance is what Kenya has under the Constitution of Kenya 2010. The proposal of a parliamentary system of governance, however, is different. There could be scenarios where, yes, Kenyans vote in a president. However, that president is purely ceremonial, sort of like the Queen, those monarch kind of systems you see in the UK. But for the Prime Minister position, now that's the powerful one in as far as that system of governance is concerned, because what happens is that Kenyans, registered voters, go to the polls to vote for members of parliament. Then the members of parliament, the majority, either by political party or by a coalition, their leader then, of course, would be voted by the majority to be the prime minister. So in that parliamentary system of governance, you have the prime minister as the head of government. So a very powerful position, running the day-to-day affairs of the country, making key and crucial decisions, and the president is merely ceremonial. You also have the deputy prime minister, so you have an extended and expanded, if you like, executive, so more office holders in as far as the top of the pyramid. Michelle.
Deputy President William Ruto also weighed in on this debate, saying he will not allow anybody to extend or bring in more positions through the back door. And there seems to be a lot of division across the political divide on this referendum debate. Who seem to be the key protagonists in the debate?
Indeed, Michelle, we have heard from many political leaders, but let's look at the key protagonists, the leaders with the majority and, big support around the country. Raila Odinga, very early on, has started talking about a need to change the constitution. He's put out several proposals. You remember during the devolution conference this year, earlier, he spoke about a need to have another tier of government other than the national government, the 47 county governments. He talked about 8 regional governments. He has not talked about that much since then. What now we keep hearing is him saying that there is a need to change the constitution, that there are weaknesses that 8 years on have been realized, and those need to be taken back to the people to make a decision on what would be the most prudent way in which to govern the country in a most efficient manner. And also his lieutenants, the likes, as I've mentioned, of Orengo, have been calling for a referendum as well. The president has not yet spoken on this matter. When people have tried to get him to comment on it, he has remained adamant that it is time to work to deliver to Kenyans, not to get into those kind of conversations. So unclear at this particular point where he stands. However, his deputy has been categorical that there should not be a referendum amendment to a constitution at this particular point. He sees it as a creation of offices for some politicians in the political circle at the very top, and as far as the executive is concerned. And those who critique his refusal to allow for changes in the constitution say is because he would want to continue to have that all-powerful presidential position were he to succeed his president in the president and his boss in 2022, Michelle.
And on matters, on the proposed parliamentary system of governance, those who would argue then that this would be denying the Kenyans the right to directly elect their president. But this was something that was contained in the draft proposal of the Constitution before the promulgation of the Constitution. What then led to, the omission of this from the same?
Indeed, Michelle, that is one of the things that stands out in as far as the review process of the Constitution of Kenya pre-2010, because all the drafts before the promulgation of the Constitution contained and was pretty much clear about a parliamentary system of governance where you had the Prime Minister, the President, Deputy President, Prime Minister, 2 Deputy Prime Ministers. So that was in the WACO draft, the Kilifi report, as well as the WACO report, as I mentioned, their Bomas draft as well is the one that I was forgetting. So all of this had either a hybrid, but all clearly stipulating a parliamentary system of governance. And when eventually the Nzamba Kitonga-led committee of experts then came together and were tasked with harmonizing, looking at the 3 previous drafts and reports and the proposals and tried to find a best fitting then draft that would come to a referendum, still that contained a parliamentary system of governance. But what many speak about is a meeting that then happened in Naivasha with a parliamentary group, and that's where everything changed. That curiously, they chose to go with a presidential system of government. There was a lot of horse trading. A lot remains unclear as to what really informed this, but regrets, some have said, and that even these conversations to date about reverting and going rather to a parliamentary system of governance is because of that one meeting that undid all the proposals over the years with the various committees and experts who'd tirelessly gone through the proposals and hearing from Kenyans. But that one Naivasha meeting, changing everything, and what was put to Kenyans to a referendum was then a presidential system of governance, which we have today, and many are calling to change the same.
Now, Sophia, we're talking about this being a matter of when as opposed to if the referendum will take place, but there have been several other efforts at a constitutional amendment. Let's talk about the Punguza Mzigo initiative there that was championed by Gatundu South Member of Parliament Moses Kuria. There was also the infamous Okoa Kenya initiative led by Raila Odinga. Both initiatives failed, however. What would be different about this particular initiative?
So right now there's the Punguza Mizigo campaign that is being championed by the Third Way Alliance led by their party leader Dr. Ekuru Okot. He was actually part of the committee of experts. Dr. Okot vied for the presidency in the last election. He lost. He has no party member in office in as far as the National Assembly or the Senate. However, he has continued to engage in the political discourse and important topics in his party, consistently commenting and coming up with proposals about what needs to be done. And one of those proposals is what they are doing now. They are seeking to change the constitution through what is called a popular initiative. So they have several proposals. That Punguza Mizigo, in essence, is one of the key proposals which talks about reduction of representation positions, saying that we need to bring those numbers down to be able to make economic sense, but also serve Kenyans more efficiently. So in fact, today, earlier on, he met with the IEBC chair, but just to briefly run our viewers through how a popular initiative effort works. Right now, the Third Way Alliance have been collecting signatures in different parts of the country. So a party is required to collect at least 1 million signatures of registered Kenyans across the country. And the issues they would want changed and considered changed in the constitution that are put together in a draft bill. Once that is done, it's then forwarded to the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. The IEBC then verifies these signatures. Are they all validly registered voters? Are they Kenyans? And all of the various thresholds that must be met. Now, you remember in 2016, you've mentioned there Okoa Kenya under the then Coalition of Reforms and Democracy. That's where they failed. They'd started a popular initiative. They collected the signatures. However, when they were taken to the IEBC for verification, quite a significant number of them were found not to be those that could be termed as signatures. Remember, some of those drawings would see of elephants, houses as signatures. So it failed at that point that they did not continue to pursue it further. So in the event, Dr. Ekuru Okot is able to collect these signatures, they're verified by the IEBC, and they have this draft bill, then the IEBC would forward this draft bill to the 47 county assemblies in the country for consideration, and they would have 3 months to do that. After this period of time, if majority of the county assemblies were in agreement with this draft bill, the same would be forwarded to both houses of Parliament, the National Assembly and the Senate. If both houses again agreed, it should go to the president for assent. However, if either of the houses failed to pass such a bill, then it would go to a referendum, meaning the citizenry would vote on it. So we're waiting to see how this plays out. But many pundits, Michelle, have argued that at the end of the day, we will be going to a referendum, going by the various voices and calls for that. And remember, Raila Odinga has even talked about that if the Building Bridges Initiative team that was put together by him and President Kenyatta, after going around the country and doing their work, come back and say Kenyans want to change the constitution, then they will have no other choice but to do that. However, we'll have to wait to see how events unfold, Michelle.
All right, many thanks, Sophia, our lead reporter. And of course, that call for referendum continues gaining momentum there as the Building Bridges Committee continues to gather its report. But the first man then who hinted at the possibility of a referendum, Kotu Secretary General Francis Atwoli, has also reiterated his call for the referendum. Atwoli insists the current size of government is way too expensive for the country to run. Let's listen.
That there shall be, not will, there shall be a referendum, whether you like it or not. Because there is no any government in the world that can carry its programs under the current constitution of Kenya. This is the most expensive constitution for any government to implement its projects. You can't have all this number of representatives everywhere, who are numbering more than even ordinary citizens, and then you expect the taxpayers' money to shoulder the responsibilities of managing a representation in Kenya. Two, after elections, people have been fighting. There is no peace. We must address that area of governance. We must look at that structure fresh. And this is in the interest of everybody, including the Deputy President, who wants to become a president. It's better to become a president in a manageable situation.
Well, besides the size of government, proponents of the referendum also want the plebiscite to address electoral injustice. Let's listen in.
We would not want to see a country where positions are determined with respect to who comes in, not by the voter, but by other forces within the state and other interests outside of the state. If we believe in democracy, the vote must count. If the vote doesn't count, we do not have a democracy and we do not have a future together.
Well, not everyone is on the same page. NC leader Musalia Mudavadi believes it is not time for a referendum in the country. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
If you put a question on a referendum issue to a hungry person, I don't know whether that person will give you an objective response to the referendum question that you're putting across. That person will have become vulnerable. And we have seen that money plays a very dangerous role in this country. When money is unleashed, people cease to think. So if you subject the Kenyans to a referendum when they are at their most vulnerable situation, what result do you want to get out of that referendum?
Well, is it a time for a referendum? Is it a matter of when or if it will take place? On the show tonight, I shall be speaking to Nandi Senator Samson Cherargei joining us, as well as former Senator Nyeri Mutahi Kagwe, who will also be joining us live from Nyeri town. Let me begin with you, Honorable Cherargei. Many thanks for joining us on the big story tonight. Will the referendum take place? Is it a matter of when as opposed to if it will take place?
Thank you, Michelle, for hosting me tonight in this. And I've seen a lot of issues that have been raised, whether it is the right time to have a referendum. I can say with a lot of authority that I think we are putting the cart before the horse. And I would advise that the proponents of referendum are creating diversionary tactics to what is affecting Kenyans at the moment. Because now we have abandoned the issue. We are now, and I want to say what ANC leader Musalia Mudavadi is saying could be truth to some extent, because instead of handling serious issues, we are now busy bringing diversionary tactics of referendum debate. And I think referendum debate will not bring down the cost of living, will not fight corruption, will not bring in inclusivity. And I think somebody did comment today that on the Building Bridges initiative, one of the aspects that we have tried to introduce is on having the national dialogue. So the big question, whose referendum is this? And I can tell you with a lot of authority, it's not Wanjiku's referendum. It is a few people who have sat somewhere and decided that since they are not part of the government, they want to elongate the executive table. And I think by sitting in government or being part of the executive, that means inclusivity. So therefore, I think I've had varied opinions. But what is important to Kenyans, which is urgent and needful, is to address the issue of cost of living, the issue of VAT. I agree there are some areas that we need as a country to sit and discuss. But does it mean, if we are talking about, for example, being overrepresented, does it mean do we need to go to a referendum based on that only, or do we need to look at the Constitution in the whole sum? For me, this is not the right time to review the Constitution. We need more time so that we can look at the Constitution properly. And I want to thank the drafters. I've seen Sophia Wanuna, your lead reporter, has taken Kenyans through the popular initiative. When you look at Article 255 of the Constitution, and I think we thank the drafters, because now it is very hard to wake up one day and amend the Constitution. It should go either through parliamentary initiative or through popular initiative. And you can see by the time you are starting the process of reviewing the Constitution, it is very complicated, it is long, and therefore, because the drafters had envisaged that some people with some specific selfish interest would wake up one day and say, let us amend the constitution together for their interest. So I think from where I sit, the constitutional review or the referendum question should not be the discussion, but in the near future, if we have to review the constitution, we will review at an appropriate time when we have agreed that we have relooked at the entire constitution and agree on the specific area, so that we don't need to take, the problem now, if we don't take care, after 2022 elections, we'll come back and tell Kenyans, let's go for referendum, because maybe the part on gender parity,
for a moment, Honorable Cherge,
the part on representation.
Let me just interrupt you for a moment and get a few things in perspective there, beginning with what you say. You say Kenyans have more serious matters to discuss. Proponents of this proposed referendum say this will be the best opportunity for Kenyans to address some of the long-standing issues in the country, including ethnic antagonism and tribalism in the country. What could be more serious than solving matters of historic injustices in the country?
No, I agree, but Michelle, some of those things, for example, I have seen the building bridges document. When you talk about inclusivity, you don't need a constitutional referendum to do that. When you talk about corruption, you don't need a referendum to discuss that. When you talk about peace and cohesion, you don't need a referendum to do that. I agree, for example, one, we are overrepresented. Two, there are so many independent constitutional commissions that take a lot of money and wage bill. But my argument is simple. If we have to do a referendum for this constitution, let us discuss in its entirety, in detail, all the aspects that we need to review this constitution on. But you look, the people who are clamoring for referendum of this constitution as at now have specific selfish interests of ensuring that the table in the executive becomes long enough for some of them to sit in it, because they believe they are not part of the government is not inclusive. And I think we are now creating diversional tactics to Kenyans. Instead, Michelle, if today we go for constitutional referendum, the cost of living in this country will not come down. Even if today we go for
Let's just take a look then at what the referendum says would bring down the cost of living. I mean, one of the biggest concerns is the blotted wage bill, which really has an effect on why the cost of living in Kenya is so high. And part of the proposals in this referendum is to reduce the number of elective seats. And just stay with me for a moment here as you take a look at what a proposal here by Third Way Alliance leader Kuro Court here says. It proposes a 2 billion shilling referendum to reduce the number of members in the National Assembly and the Senate to 194, down from the current 416. And this is something that is going to save the country 31.8 billion shillings and 5 billion shillings per year, respectively. That's a lot of money to save the country. Don't you think then it would be time for a referendum?
No, but if we are going for referendum on only one question on the issue of representation, then we're failing. Because the people, if you have realized, Michelle, the people pushing for referendum, most of them have discussed the issue of inclusivity in leadership. And the argument is that they need to introduce the ceremonial presidency, they need to have executive prime minister, or generally what we call parliamentary parliamentary process or a parliamentary system in this country, just like some of the countries like the UK and the rest. The aspect that they are trying to bring in is that they are hiding behind the issue of representation. And my argument has been very simple, that if we have to go for referendum, we should not look only at one question. We should go back and ask Kenyans. And that is why I'm asking the proponents of referendum, whose referendum is this? Certainly it is not Wanjiku, because no one has gone, as we call the national dialogue through the Building Bridges initiative, has gone down to engage the ordinary mwananchi and ask them, what are the important questions that in case a referendum we should have in this country? The other day we said we need now to calm down and ensure the Big Four agenda of the president starts to be implemented as we go on. But now we have started another diversional tactic of referendum, yet we don't know what Kenyans, the questions that Kenyans want. Because that we are lands and many other interested parties have told us we have our represented, I agree. We have issues of more independent constitutions, I agree. But the big question is the ordinary mwananchi. the ordinary Wanjiku have gotten an opportunity to voice their concern that today want a referendum, one. Number two, which questions would there be in that they would want to be addressed? And those are the big questions that we need to ask ourselves instead of discussing.
You do agree that the country is overrepresented, but you do not agree with reducing the number of elective seats, which is a question on its own. But let's focus on the calls for referendum and the parliamentary system of governance, which has received a lot of opposition from critics of this proposal. What is so wrong with the parliamentary system of governance? Proponents of it say it would save the country a lot of heartache when it comes to the winner gets all in terms of general elections, and that would really save the country in terms of post-election violence.
No, I agree with you that parliamentary system has its own challenges, but you know, I heard one of the former MPs saying that every vote should count. When we move from presidential system to parliamentary system, it means the largest number of members of parliament with a majority in both houses or in parliament will elect an executive prime minister who will be the head of government. The person who will go and elect at maybe using one man, one vote, or through universal suffrage will be ceremonial president who will be the head of state. But the issue, if you look at that arrangement, it will mean we'll increase the executive. Because now you'll be having the prime minister, they will become the deputy prime minister, maybe one or two. You'll now be having a president and maybe a deputy president. It will mean that the table of the executive, as I've said, will become bigger. And it will mean, again, we'll have to get more people and ensure they sit on the table. It means the wage bill will go, the expenses of the government will go, the executive will go up, because by the fact that we are introducing the prime minister, executive prime minister position, and maybe two deputy premiers, and maybe you have the president who is the ceremonial president, and maybe the deputy president, it will mean the cabinet will now change. It will mean the executive will become much more bigger to get into the interest of maybe introduction of the prime minister and introduction of the executive prime minister. The other aspect is that Kenyans will no longer have a say who becomes the head of the government. That person will be determined by either the coalition or the majority in the parliament. And therefore it means Kenyans will no longer have direct vote to elect the president and have a decision, which means a few individuals. And we know, Michelle, we know how our parliament or our National Assembly operates. The issue is that there will be few people who will sit somewhere and determine the agenda or how Kenyans will be run through an individual. And therefore, the parliamentary system is not fair to Kenyans, because the one man, one vote will not matter. It will mean the representative of the people will decide who becomes the head of government or the head of executive. Then you will have a ceremonial president who will become the head of state. In that aspect, the only aspect, the only aspect is that the executive now will become bigger, because you're introducing prime minister and deputy premiers, and now you have the president and the deputy president.
All right,
it will mean the executive will change, and therefore it will mean more money to run the executive.
All right, so let's just hold it there. Nandi Senator Samson Cherargei, they're discussing the push and pull for and against a referendum, and a debate that is fast mutating in the country into a question of when rather than if. We take a short break here on The Big Story. When we come back, we'll be speaking to former Mwingi Central Member of Parliament, Job Mutambu, who is among a section of former Member of Parliament who have come out now in support of the proposed referendum. This is The Big Story. Do stay with us.
This is KTN News.